The Meringue River flowed through Sultai territory, deep into the jungle and around many of their most illustrious palaces. Along the river, far from these palaces, were less regal settlements, homes of farmers and fishermen, built on raised wooden stilts and platforms. Although the marshy jungle was inhospitable to most, some had found the means to make a living, but only enough to scrape by. Their stomachs were as empty as their purses, and the small town of Knicl was in debt to the Sultai. They couldn't remember if it was for taxes or outright extortion, but they knew that Sidisi's hand was there to collect. What the town could call its leadership was a small group of men and women who were only forced to get together and congregate when dealing with the Sultai. The vessel pulled up to the dock. It moved slowly, and the village leaders could see the ropes from the ship's bow leading into the water. The water there was shallow enough they could see the undead Sibzig servants pulling the ship, some of their heads partially above the waterline. Many of them had once lived in the village they were visiting. One of the younger leaders retched off the side of the dock. The others kept their composure, having dealt with the Sultai in the past. In contrast to the Sibzig, the vessel was opulent and covered in gold. A light breeze brought the smell of perfume and spices to the leaders. A human Sultai enforcer lowered the gangplank for the leaders to enter the ship and head below decks. The only sound was the clinking of coins. Tiagam sat on his chair, an ornate golden throne covered in silk and pillows. He put his hand on the temple of his bald head, closing his eyes, trying to force out the sound. He used to be able to do that, focus his mind to close out all distractions, but that was when he was Jeskai, weak, idealistic. But Tiagam would easily trade strength for peace and quiet. Unless you've managed to pull gold from the air, I doubt there are any more or less than there have been, Tiagam said, annoyed. A deep laugh bellowed next to him. Do you not doubt that I could perform such a parlor trick? I wouldn't doubt that you could, only that you prefer to take from others, Tiagam said, massaging his temples. Again, a deep laugh. You'd better shake off that headache, Hand. Your public awaits. Laughter again, followed by the clinking of coins. Tiagam had always craved more. As a young man, he never knew what that meant. Growing up in a small fishing village in the shadow of the Jeskai strongholds, he always thought that had meant knowledge. That was how his father had conditioned him. With wisdom came respect. With respect would come a stable life. He had believed that fate, at least for a while. He had found he was not a physical fighter, not like the other monks, but his power lay more in his mind. While others mastered pearls or mantis riding, Tiagam absorbed the scrolls and the lessons of his teachers. He was still a fighter, but preferred the scrolls. He even had the honor of being trained by the Khan of the Jeskai, Narset. She once confessed she regarded him as one of her most adept students. Tiagam felt great pride from that comment, but realized that would be the height of what he could get from the Jeskai. Respect, honor, all for just a stable life. He didn't set out to join another clan. In fact, he had elected to follow the way of the wandering warrior, or so he had told Narset and the other monks he had trained with. He had hoped to uncover different disciplines of magic, possibly learn different forms of fighting. Tiagam traveled to Purugir, the trading post near the Salt Road, hoping to find work as either a teacher or bodyguard. He had always heard of the Sultai as decadent monsters, and although he was inclined to agree, seeing some of their nobles pass through Purugir had sparked his interest. They had rich clothes and exquisite taste, but Tiagam sparked their interest as well. A Jeskai looking for work was peculiar. That night, a Rakshasa visited him in the inn where he slept. The Rakshasa were powerful demons, and the Sultai derived much of their power and undead from age-old deals made with them. That Rakshasa, named Ebiri, wished to make Tiagam a deal. In exchange for the privilege of being the knowledgeable Tiagam's most humble servant, Ebiri would bring Tiagam great fortune and power within the Sultai. Tiagam knew he was being deceived in some fashion, but the immediate promise of power won out over his common sense. The pact was made, and in exchange for power, Tiagam swore his life in service of the Rakshasa. Tiagam rose to chief advisor of Sidisi, the Khan of the Sultai. The brood tyrant sent Tiagam to perform her decrees outside of the palace, which was a great honor, as she usually kept those she mistrusted close to her so that she could be the one to end their lives. Tiagam executed Sidisi's rule throughout Sultai territory, all under the watchful eye of his true master Ebiri, who had bound himself to Tiagam. The farmer stank. Not even the spices and perfumes that covered the smell of a wet sibsig could remove the stench of the peasants that stood before Tiagam. They looked worried. They always looked worried, and seemed unsure if they should speak or wait for Tiagam to begin the proceedings. Tiagam was content with sitting back in his chair, making them squirm a little longer. They were those who had the poor fortune of being born in Sultai territory, and although they were required to give tax and food to the Sultai, they had less value to Sidisi than a sibsig. An older man, a rarity in these parts, stepped forward to speak, which shocked Tiagam, as one didn't gain gray hair by speaking first. "My lord Tiagam," he said as he lowered his head, stepping forward to approach. "Our next shipment will exceed the current quota and make up for what the last shipment lacked." The man clearly guessing as to why the Sultai were there, and it was a good guess. Tiagam was disappointed at the level-headed response. He wanted to have fun. "Why do you not kneel in the presence of your better?" Tiagam asked with a smirk. The man took to a knee and knelt. Tiagam cleared his throat, and the man repositioned himself so his forehead was on the floor. The Rakshasa Ebiri laughed from the shadows. "If you want him to bow any lower, he should bow from below the deck." Tiagam hid his anger at the comment. "How many children do you have?" The man didn't rise from his prostrate position. "3, my lord." "Now you have 2, Tiagam said. He nodded to the human guard, who nodded back and left the ship. Outside on the river, the sibsig stood in the water, tethered to Tiagam's boat. Blurred figures ran fast on the water, using the sibsig's heads as stepping stones. As the guard sent by Tiagam was exiting the ship to enact his task, 6 small daggers riddled his body, and he fell over dead before he realized what had happened. The figures ran up the tethers, ready to perform their task. Tiagam would not have time to revel in his cruelty. From the sides of the ship, 3 blurred figures flew through the windows into the open room. 3 human Jeskai monks stood with clenched fists. They dashed towards Tiagam. The peasants ran the opposite way, heading toward the door. "By Narset's will," one of them shouted. Tiagam moved to stand. He was able to dodge the first fist, but the second caught him in the shoulder, sending him spiraling to the floor. Rusty, but not completely out of practice, he used the momentum of the fall to send his foot out to kick the first monk in the leg near the knee. Bending the monk's leg in the opposite direction, the monk cried out in pain and fell over. Ibiri emerged from the shadows. One of the remaining monks threw daggers at Tiagam, but the Rakshasa growled in their direction, and they fell to the ground as though hitting an invisible wall. Although Ibiri usually hunched over, the feline demon then stood tall, nearly hitting his head on the ceiling. Tiagam pushed himself from the floor and saw a chance to free himself from the demon in the confusion. As the Rakshasa willed dark magic, purple mist emanated from his eyes toward one of the monks. Tiagam drew a dagger from his ankle and rushed toward the demon. Although the assassins were there to kill him, Tiagam knew the greatest threat to his life had always been the Rakshasa. The remaining monk grabbed Tiagam's arm, but the Sultai spun away, tossing his dagger to his other hand and striking at the Rakshasa. The dagger stuck in Ibiri's side, interrupting his concentration, and the monk who was hovering in the air, strangled by smoke, fell to the ground. Ibiri roared and backhanded both Tiagam and the monk who held him. They both slammed into the wall, but the monk was not deterred. He punched Tiagam in the throat, interrupting Tiagam's breathing. The Rakshasa grabbed the monk by his clothes and pulled him back, then grabbed his head. Ibiri crushed it, exploding brain and skull all over the cabin. The uninjured monk had recovered, but Ibiri continued his spell and choked the life from the monk with his dark magic. Tiagam finally caught his breath, and the hulking Rakshasa picked him up by his clothing and pulled him close, so the Sultai's face was next to his mouth. "I own you," Ibiri growled. The Rakshasa dropped Tiagam, who picked himself up. There was still a monk alive, but unable to move due to the damage to his leg. "Who sent you?" Tiagam asked. "Narset, Khan of the Jeskai," he said with contempt, cringing through the pain. "That doesn't seem like her," Tiagam replied. "Are you saying she sent you, or that you act in her name?" The monk didn't reply. Tiagam nodded to Ibiri, and the Rakshasa stepped on the monk's chest, crushing him. "Do you think the Jeskai Khan meant to end you with assassins?" Ibiri asked. "No," Tiagam said. "They were zealots, most likely acting without her knowledge. I'm sure there are still many among the Jeskai who would like to see a mistake like me removed from the picture. Still, things have been escalating lately, so I can't be sure dear old Narset hasn't finally become more of a threat. I'll take care of it," Ibiri growled. "I'll take care of it," Tiagam restated, more forceful. Ibiri didn't reply, but returned to the shadows. Tiagam signaled to the Sibsig to keep the boat moving as he began to size the intact dead monks for golden uniforms.